You think you can put your filthy hands on my future mother-in-law? You worthless Mexican trash. Victoria Ashford's voice sliced through the quiet afternoon like a blade. Elena Reyes, only 26 but carrying the composure of someone who had survived far worse, was crouched low, her arms wrapped protectively around the frail frame of Margaret Caruso. The 72-year-old woman trembled violently, her eyes wide with terror, still recovering from a stroke that had stolen half her words. Victoria's designer stiletto connected with Elena's ribs in a vicious kick. "Get your hands off her, you meddling piece of garbage!" she hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. Elena gasped through the pain. "Please stop. She's hurting. Please don't hurt her anymore. She's your fiancé's mother. Think of her heart. She can't take this." But Victoria only laughed, a sound like nails scraping glass. She snatched a crystal vase from the mahogany table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, missing Elena's head by inches. Elena flinched, but refused to release Margaret. "Mrs. Caruso," she whispered urgently, "I've got you. Breathe. Please breathe. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of love, justice, and redemption." From the arched doorway, the sound of footsteps carried in slow and measured, yet heavy with authority, each step like a hammer striking marble. Vincent Caruso entered, 6'2", dressed in a perfectly tailored black three-piece suit, his steel gray eyes cold, the eyes of a man who had witnessed too many deaths and had long since forgotten what it meant to be afraid. At 36, Vincent Caruso was a name that made Chicago's underworld bow its head, a ghost in the whispered stories of the elite, the kind of man no one dared meet eye to eye for more than 3 seconds. And now those eyes swept across the room, taking in every detail with the precision of a predator. His mother was trembling in the maid's arms. His fiancée was sobbing in the corner. Shards of crystal were scattered across the floor. In a heartbeat, Victoria Ashford changed completely. She was no longer the wild beast who had just kicked Elena in the ribs or hurled a crystal vase like a madwoman. She became a pitiful victim, shaking, tears streaming down a flawlessly made-up face. Victoria rushed toward Vincent, her hands clawing at her own arms to raise red marks, her voice choked and aggrieved. "Vincent, thank God you're home. I tried to stop her, but she pushed your mother down. I couldn't pull her away." Victoria turned and pointed straight at Elena, her green eyes glittering with calculation disguised beneath a veil of tears. "Your mother has always hated me, you know that. She told this housekeeper to watch me for weeks now. They're working together to ruin us. Today I accidentally found them talking about something, and when I asked, this Elena attacked me, then pushed your mother down." Elena looked up, her brown eyes still holding the pain from the kick to her ribs, yet her voice remained calm even as it trembled. "Sir, please let me explain." "I did not. Shut up." Victoria cut her off, her voice suddenly sharpened with ice, then instantly returned to helplessness. "You see, Vincent, she does not even know respect." A servant daring to argue with her master, Margaret Caruso tried to say something. She reached toward her son, her mouth moving, but the stroke 2 months earlier had stolen half her language. The sounds that came out were only meaningless, broken, stammering, jagged with pain, not, but no one understood what she was trying to say. Tears ran down Margaret's lined face, because she knew the truth and could not speak it, and she looked at Elena with an expression full of guilt and powerlessness. Vincent stepped forward, and with each step the air in the room seemed to thicken into something you could almost feel. He looked at Elena, the young woman still kneeling on the floor, still supporting his mother, her white blouse smeared with dust, her face pale with pain yet her chin lifted. He looked at Victoria, his beautiful fiancée, crying with those red scratch marks on her arms. And in those steel-gray eyes, Elena saw what made the blood in her veins turn to ice. He had already passed judgment, before he let her speak a single word, before he looked into his own mother's eyes to search for the truth. Vincent Caruso chose to believe the woman he was about to marry, and Elena Reyes, a 26-year-old orphan from the slums, was only a servant, not worth listening to. Vincent's voice rang out cold as steel, sharp as a lash. "Let my mother go, right now." And Elena knew she had been convicted without a trial. Elena slowly let Margaret go, every movement gentle and careful, as if the old woman were made of crystal and might shatter at any moment. She eased Margaret's hand down onto the arm of the upholstered chair, smoothing the wrinkled back of that hand one last time before she stood. The pain from the kick to her ribs still pulsed deep inside, but Elena did not let it show. 26 years of living in the foster system had taught her how to swallow tears and keep her spine straight even when everything within her was breaking apart. She stood there, blouse dust stained, hair fallen loose, yet her brown eyes looked forward with the dignity of someone who knew she was innocent. 2 weeks earlier, in this very room, Margaret had taken her son's hand and spoken in a voice clearer than it was now. "That woman will destroy this family, Vincent. I see it in her eyes, the greed, the calculation. Elena sees it too. That girl is the only person I trust in this house." Vincent had dismissed his mother's words then, believing she was simply jealous of the woman about to take the most important place in his life. But someone else had heard that conversation. Victoria Ashford had stood behind the velvet curtain, her hands clenched so tightly her nails cut into her palms, and she had sworn that the two women who dared oppose her would pay. From that day on, Victoria looked at Elena with the gaze of someone who wanted to crush an annoying insect. Not because Elena had done anything wrong, but because Margaret trusted her, because she could see through Victoria's true face, because Elena's very existence was a reminder that not everyone was blinded by Victoria Ashford's beauty and tricks. Now Victoria stepped closer to Vincent, resting her head against his shoulder like a victim seeking shelter. She whispered softly enough to feel private, yet loud enough that Elena heard every word. "Your mother chose a Mexican maid over me, Vincent. I am your fiancée, the woman who is about to become your wife, the mistress of this family. But in her eyes, I am worth less than some strange girl from the streets." Those words slipped like poison into Vincent's ear. He looked at Elena, looked at his mother, then looked at Victoria crying in his arms. And in that moment, Elena knew she had lost before she could even fight. "You are fired," Vincent said, his voice flat and cold as a frozen lake. "Pack your things and leave. Right now." Margaret let out a strangled sound. She tried to reach for Elena, her trembling fingers grasping at empty air, her mouth forming broken sounds that came in painful fragments. "No, Elena, do not." But Vincent did not look at his mother. He had turned his back, one arm still around Victoria, as if he were shielding her from danger. Elena lowered her gaze to Margaret one last time. The old woman was crying, tears running down her wrinkled face, her aged eyes holding all the apologies she could not force into words. Elena gave her a small smile, a smile full of sadness and love. Then she turned to Vincent. "Sir," Elena said, her voice rough from holding back what threatened to spill over, "do not leave her alone with that woman anymore. She will kill her." Vincent did not answer. He did not even bother to turn around. Elena understood that to him she was only air, only dust, something not worth wasting another second on. She turned and walked away, her back still straight, her head still held high, each footstep echoing on the marble like a funeral drum for justice itself. As Elena passed through the doorway, she glanced back one last time, and she saw it. Behind Vincent's back, Victoria was smiling, a pure smile of victory, cruel and satisfied, the smile of someone who had just crushed an opponent beneath her heel. Victoria's green eyes met Elena's brown ones, and in that instant, they both understood this was not the end. The rain began to fall the moment Elena drove her battered old Honda Civic out through the gates of the Caruso estate. The droplets struck the windshield as if the sky itself were weeping for her, or perhaps laughing at the tragic fate of an orphan girl who had dared to believe she might belong somewhere. She drove without direction, through Chicago streets drowned in a gray curtain of rain, past neon lights smeared and bleeding like spilled paint across the sorrowful canvas of her life. And then she stopped at the Michigan Avenue Bridge, where the Chicago River moved beneath it, black and cold as her heart felt in that moment. Elena turned off the engine and pushed the door open, stepping out into the storm. The rain immediately soaked her dark hair, seeped through her thin clothes, and sank into her bones with a cruel, biting chill. But she did not care. She walked to the railing, both hands closing tight around the rusted metal, and stared down at the churning black water below. 26 years. 26 years she had tried to live, tried to believe tomorrow would be better, tried to hold on to the fragile hope that one day someone would see her, would love her, would give her a real family. But 26 years had brought her only abandonment, beatings, false accusations, and now the look of contempt from Vincent Caruso, as if she were nothing but trash beneath the sole of his shoe. She was not the saint people thought she was. She was tired now, tired all the way down to the marrow of her bones. The memory of her fourth foster family surged up like a nightmare that refused to let her go. She was 14, asleep in a small, cramped room, when her drunken foster father kicked the door in and stormed inside. He yanked her up by the hair, slapped her down onto the floor, then beat and kicked her without mercy, while his mouth spilled filthy, slurred words. When her foster mother heard the noise and ran upstairs, She did not save her. She stared at Elena with eyes full of hatred and screamed that Elena had seduced her husband, that this cunning orphan brat had to get out of her house immediately. Elena was thrown out into the street at 2 a.m, her lips swollen, her eye bruised purple, with nothing but a torn backpack and a heart shattered into a million pieces. 12 years had passed since that night, but the scar in her soul had never healed. Maybe letting go would be easier. Maybe that cold water would carry her to a place where there was no more suffering, no more betrayal, no more accusations. Elena climbed onto the bridge railing, her legs trembling on the slick, wet metal. The cold wind rose hard, as if trying to shove her down, or perhaps trying to pull her back. She closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath, and prepared to let go. Her phone in her pocket began to vibrate. She meant to ignore it, but it kept vibrating, urgent and unrelenting, as if someone were desperate to reach her. On instinct, Elena pulled it out and looked. A message from an unknown number glowed on the screen, blurred with rainwater. "Margaret keeps calling your name. She needs you. Please do not give up." The first words hit Elena like lightning. "Margaret keeps calling your name. She needs you." The image of the 72-year-old woman reaching for her, her mouth stammering as she tried to say Elena's name in desperation, crashed over her like a tidal wave. Elena had no one in this world. No father, no mother, no family, no one who truly loved her. But Margaret needed her. That helpless old woman was in the house with someone who wanted her dead, unable to speak, unable to protect herself, and calling Elena's name as if Elena were her last lifeline. Tears mixed with rain and streamed down Elena's face. She cried the way she had never been allowed to cry, her sobs breaking open in the pounding downpour. Then slowly, she climbed down from the railing, collapsed onto the freezing bridge deck, and sat there in the Chicago rain, arms wrapped around her knees, crying until she nearly passed out. She would keep living, not for herself, but for a lonely old woman praying for a miracle inside that luxurious but icy mansion. Elena did not know who had sent that message, but it had saved her life. And somewhere in the Caruso estate, an old woman was praying for a miracle to happen. 3 days had passed since Elena left, and the Caruso mansion sank into an oppressive heaviness, as if death were lurking behind every wall. Margaret Caruso lay in bed, her face pale as blank paper, her aged eyes fixed on the ceiling as though searching for something she would never find. She refused food, refused medicine, refused every attempt by the staff to keep her alive. Each time someone carried a tray into her room, she only turned her face away, her lips forming the only name she could still pronounce clearly since the stroke. Elena. 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 Dr. Nathan Cole, the man who had cared for the Caruso family for 20 years, stepped out of Margaret's room with worry written all over him. He found Vincent standing in the hallway, those steel-gray eyes turned toward the window as if trying to outrun reality. Dr. Cole spoke plainly, his voice weighted down. "She is giving up, Vincent. Her heart grows weaker every day. She will not eat. She will not drink water. She will not even look at anyone. If this continues, she will not make it through this month." Vincent did not answer, but his jaw tightened so hard it seemed you could almost hear his teeth grind. Dr. Cole let out a tired breath and walked away, leaving Vincent alone with his tangled thoughts. Victoria appeared at the far end of the corridor, her flawless face arranged into a look of concern that did not reach her eyes. She set a hand on Vincent's shoulder, her voice sweet as honey, yet cold as ice. "I am so sad about your mother, Vincent. But maybe this is for the best. She is old, she is sick, maybe this is the time for her to rest." Vincent did not look at her, only gave a small nod and walked toward the office. Victoria watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Then the smile on her lips vanished, replaced by a calculating chill. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the darkened sitting room, never realizing that in the shadowed corner behind the velvet curtain, Luca Benedetti was standing there, silent as a shade. Victoria spoke into the phone, her voice utterly different from the sweetness she had just used, cold and ruthless, like a killer laying out a plan. "Yeah, it is me. The old hag is about to die. She refuses to eat, refuses everything. Fine. When she is gone, I will control it all. Money, power, everything. Vincent is too blinded by love for me to see the truth." Someone on the other end said something, and Victoria gave a short, scornful laugh that sounded like glass cracking. "What are you worried about with Boston? The only witness who knows about that is this old hag, and she is about to die. When she goes into the ground, that secret gets buried with her. No one will know what I did to that man. No one." She paused, and her green eyes flashed with something vicious. "And the Mexican maid. The old woman cannot say anything clearly, and nobody believes the word of a street girl. Everything is under my control. Victoria ended the call and walked out, her high heels tapping against the marble like a countdown to the ruin of the people she meant to destroy. She had no idea that every word she had just spoken had been caught by listening ears and stored away by a razor-sharp mind. Luca Benedetti waited until Victoria's footsteps faded, then stepped out of the darkness without a sound. The face of the 34-year-old head of security showed nothing, but his eyes lit with a dangerous spark. He went straight to Vincent's office, knocked 3 times, then entered without waiting for an answer. Vincent looked up from a spread of paperwork, his steel-gray eyes exhausted and haunted. He asked, "What is it, Luca?" Luca answered, his voice low and steady. "Boss, you need to review the entire security camera footage. All of it." From that day, Vincent stared at Luca, reading something in the eyes of the man who had been loyal to him for 12 years. His jaw clenched. He said, "Show me everything." Vincent did not yet know that what he was about to see would shatter every belief he had ever held. The security room sat deep in the basement of the Caruso mansion, flooded with a cold blue glow from dozens of surveillance monitors. Vincent lowered himself into the leather chair at the control desk, with Luca behind him, silent as a loyal shadow. The head of security rewound the footage from 3 days earlier, back to the precise moment everything had begun to collapse. The screen showed the familiar sitting room, the place where Vincent had seen Elena kneeling beside his mother, but this time the recording began 15 minutes before that moment, and what Vincent saw made the blood in his veins turn to ice. Victoria walked into the sitting room, where Margaret was alone in an armchair reading a book. There was no false sweetness, no honeyed smile. Victoria's face was cold as winter, her green eyes burning with a pure, hateful fire. "You old witch," Victoria snarled, her voice tearing through the silence of the room. "You will never take Vincent away from me. Never." Margaret lifted her gaze to Victoria, her old eyes unshaken even though her body had grown much weaker after the stroke. She spoke slowly, each word clear and firm. "I know what you did in Boston. Victoria, I know about the man you killed." Vincent was struck as if by lightning. He leaned forward, those steel-gray eyes locked on the screen as if he could not believe what he was hearing. On the screen, Victoria froze for an instant, then her face twisted with rage and panic. "What do you know?" she screamed. "You do not know anything. You are just a senile old woman." "I have evidence," Margaret said, her voice strangely calm. "I have kept it for 2 years now, since the day you began pursuing my son. I know who you are, Victoria Ashford. You are a murderer, and I will not let my son marry a killer." Victoria's scream came like an animal backed into a corner. She lunged at Margaret and slapped the 72-year-old woman across the face with all the strength of madness. "Shut up! Shut up! You damn old hag!" She struck again and again, slapping, punching, grabbing the old woman's hair, shouting vile curses. Margaret could not fight back, her body too weak after the stroke. She could only lift her hands to shield her face while the blows fell like rain. Vincent clenched his teeth until his jaw ached, his fist tightening against the arm of the chair until his knuckles turned white. Then the sitting room door flew open, and Elena rushed in. Without a second of hesitation, without a flicker of fear, the 26-year-old woman threw herself into the storm of violence, using her own body to shield Margaret. She wrapped her arms around the old woman, turned her back to Victoria, and took every kick, every punch, every slap that Victoria unleashed. Elena did not scream, did not beg for herself. She only held Margaret tighter and whispered soothing words into her ear. "I am here, Mrs. Caruso. I will protect you. Breathe. Please breathe." Vincent shot to his feet, the chair sliding back and crashing to the floor with a thunderous bang. He stared at the screen, at the image of Elena being beaten while she protected his mother, at the image of Victoria raging like a wild beast, and everything he had ever believed shattered into pieces like a sandcastle before a tidal wave. He had thrown Elena out. He had believed Victoria. He had left his mother alone with someone who wanted her dead. He had nearly killed his own mother with his blindness and pride. With a growl full of rage and pain, Vincent drove his fist straight into the screen in front of him. Glass exploded outward, blood from his knuckles dripping onto the control desk, but he felt no pain. Physical pain was nothing compared to the agony tearing his heart apart from the inside. Luca stood silently behind him, not saying a word. He knew that in this moment, his boss needed to be alone with the brutal truth. Vincent turned, his face carved from cold stone, but his steel-gray eyes burned with the fire of hell. His voice rang out, and it was the voice of death. "Find Victoria, and find Elena. If she harmed herself because of me..." He could not finish the sentence. The The thought was too painful to force into words. Victoria was sitting in the upstairs master bedroom, smoothing lotion onto her skin in front of the mirror as if nothing had happened, when the door burst open and Vincent walked in. She turned with the sweet smile she had practiced thousands of times, but that smile died on her lips the instant she saw his face. Vincent's steel-gray eyes were no longer the eyes of a man in love with her. They were the eyes of an executioner staring down a criminal. "Vincent, darling." Victoria rose, her voice honey-sweet. "What is going on? You look—" "Down to the sitting room," Vincent cut in, his tone so flat it was frightening. "Right now." Victoria followed him down the stairs, her mind already racing, calculating every possible outcome. When they stepped into the sitting room, she noticed Luca standing in the corner with 2 other guards, and a laptop open on the table. Her heart beat faster by a single sharp notch, but she kept her composure. "You are scaring me, Vincent. What is this about?" "Explain," Vincent said, pointing at the laptop. The screen showed a frozen security camera frame, stopped on the moment Victoria's hand was raised to strike Margaret. The color drained from Victoria's face in an instant, but she recovered quickly. She broke into tears, crocodile tears spilling as if someone had turned a key. "You do not understand, Vincent. Your mother, she has lost her mind. She attacked me first. She said terrible things, baseless accusations. I was only defending myself." "Defending yourself," Vincent echoed, his voice cold as ice. "Against a 72-year-old woman who just suffered a stroke. You do not understand how insane she is." Victoria sobbed, dropping to her knees before Vincent like a helpless victim. "She imagines everything. She hates me, you know that. She will say anything to tear us apart." Vincent did not answer. He simply reached out and pressed play on the laptop, and the room filled with the sound from the recording. Margaret's voice rang out, clear and firm. "I know what you did in Boston, Victoria. I know about the man you killed." Victoria went rigid, as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over her. The mask of the pitiful victim shattered and fell away, revealing the true face of a killer backed into a corner. She sprang to her feet, her green eyes igniting with a mad fire. "He deserved it!" Victoria screamed, her voice no longer sweet but sharp as a razor. "That man in Boston tried to destroy me. He threatened to expose everything, to ruin my future. I only did what I had to do to survive." She turned on Vincent, and her tears now were not a weapon but the overflow of something unhinged. "And your mother, that miserable old woman, has been blackmailing me for months. She threatened to tell you everything if I did not leave. But I built all of this. I fought for 2 years to get this place, and I will not let anyone take it from me." Vincent closed his eyes for 1 second, and in that single moment, he understood everything. His mother had not been blackmailing Victoria. She had been trying to protect him, trying to stop her son from marrying a murderer, yet unwilling to destroy his happiness with a brutal truth. She had suffered in silence, had tried to find a way to make Victoria leave on her own, and the price she paid was violence and the slow collapse of her spirit. "Luca," Vincent said, his voice stripped of emotion, "get her out of here. She has 1 hour to pack and get out of Chicago. If I ever see her face again, I will not need a court or the police." The 2 guards stepped in, each gripping one of Victoria's arms and dragging her toward the door. Victoria fought wildly, her beautiful face twisted with hatred, her voice rising like a witch's curse. "This is not over, Vincent. I will destroy everything you love, starting with that Mexican maid." Those words echoed through the mansion like a poisoned spell. Luca Benedetti pulled the car up in front of a cheap motel in the southern suburbs of Chicago, a place where the paint was peeling off the walls and the sign flickered as if it might go dark at any moment. It had taken him nearly 2 days to track down Elena Reyes, moving from traffic cameras to gas stations, until he finally located her old Honda Civic in this place's parking lot. Luca walked to the front desk, handed the manager a photo of Elena along with a few bills, and quickly got a room number. 107, ground floor, end of the hallway. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing, silent as a grave. Luca pulled out his phone and called the manager, demanded the door be opened for an emergency, and when the door swung wide, the head of security felt his heart stall for a single beat. The room was empty. The bed still held the crisp folds of cheap motel sheets. The closet door stood open with nothing inside, but it was not the emptiness that froze Luca in place. On the small table by the window, a bottle of sleeping pills lay tipped over, white tablets scattered across the wood. Beside it was a sheet of paper in trembling handwriting, only a few unfinished lines. "I am sorry, Mrs. Margaret. I cannot." The last letters smeared, as if the writer had cried while writing them, or no longer had the strength to finish. Luca felt as though someone had driven a fist straight into his chest. He bolted outside, firing questions at the manager about the last time he had seen Elena, about anything unusual, but the man only shrugged and said the girl had checked out early that morning and left no message behind. With shaking hands, Luca dialed Vincent. "Boss." His voice went rough. "I found her motel room, but she is not here. There are sleeping pills on the table, and an unfinished letter for Mrs. Margaret, I think." He could not finish the sentence. On the other end, an engine roared like a wild animal. Vincent was driving at a mad speed, ignoring every traffic law, ignoring every danger. In his mind, there was only one image: Elena Reyes, the girl who had used her own body to shield his mother, lying somewhere cold and alone because of what he had done. But when Vincent arrived, Luca already had new information. After questioning people across the area, a homeless man told him a young Mexican woman had been volunteering at St. Mary, a charity hospital a few blocks away. She had no money, no place to stay, but instead of collapsing, she had gone there and asked to work without pay, in exchange for a temporary bed and meals. Luca found Elena in the hospital's shelter care unit, changing the bandages on an elderly man with gentle hands and a weary smile that still carried warmth. The unfinished letter was not a suicide note. It was an apology for not being able to stay and care for Margaret, because she did not have enough money to survive, because she felt she had failed in her duty to protect the woman she loved. But she could not complete it, could not force herself to write final goodbyes, because some part of her was not ready to let go. When Luca stepped closer, Elena lifted her eyes to him, hollow and exhausted. She did not look surprised, did not look afraid, only drained, like someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Caruso sent me," Luca said. "He knows the truth. He watched all the security footage. He wants to apologize to you." Elena stood, set the roll of gauze on the table, her face giving away nothing. "I have nothing left to say to Mr. Caruso." Her voice lay flat, like still water in a stagnant pond. Then Luca added 5 words, and those words cracked every wall Elena had built around her heart. "Mrs. Margaret is dying." Elena. Those 5 words hit Elena like a knife, driven straight into her heart. Mrs. Margaret is dying. The 72-year-old woman who had treated her like a true daughter, who had called her Mija, who had held her when she cried, was lying in a sickbed waiting for death because Elena had left. Elena did not say a single word. She only nodded, untied her volunteer apron, and followed Luca out to the car waiting outside. During the entire drive back to the Caruso mansion, she did not ask about Vincent, did not ask about Victoria, did not ask anything at all. She only stared out through the window, her brown eyes full of emotions that had no name. When the car stopped at the mansion gates, Elena stepped out and walked straight inside without waiting for anyone to lead her. She knew the way to Margaret's room as well as she knew the way home, because in the 3 months she had worked here, that room was the only place she had ever felt loved. She pushed the door open and stepped in, and what she saw shattered her heart. Margaret lay in bed, her face pale as blank paper, her eyes tightly shut, the lines in her face seeming deeper after only a few days apart. But when Elena came to the bedside, the old woman seemed to sense her presence. Those aged eyes slowly opened, and when she saw Elena's face, Margaret began to cry. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks, and her trembling hands reached out, searching through the air. "My daughter," Margaret said, her voice halting yet far clearer than it had been the last time they met, as if love itself had given her the strength to speak. "You came back. I prayed. I prayed every night." Elena sank to her knees beside the bed, took Margaret's thin hand, and pressed it to her own cheek. She cried, tears streaming down without restraint, but these were tears of reunion, not of farewell. "I am here, Mrs. Caruso. I am sorry I left. I am sorry." Margaret shook her head weakly, her eyes heavy with guilt and regret. "No, I am the one who must apologize. I knew about Victoria, about what she did in Boston, about the man she killed. I kept that secret because I wanted to protect my son, because I did not want him to know the woman he loved was a murderer. I thought I could make her leave on her own, but instead, I almost got you killed. I am sorry, Elena. I am sorry." Elena tightened her grip on Margaret's hand, a gentle smile forming on her lips, even as tears still clung to her cheeks. "I forgive you. I always forgive you. You are the only person in this world who has loved me like a real daughter. I will never blame you for anything." Margaret sobbed and pulled Elena into her frail arms, and the 2 women held each other in a room filled with late afternoon sunlight. In the doorway, Vincent Caruso stood quietly watching. He had been there since Elena entered, had witnessed the entire tearful reunion, had seen how Elena forgave his mother at once without a single word of accusation, and he realized the girl before him had a heart greater than anyone he had ever met. When Elena finally stood and turned toward the door, she saw Vincent, but she did not look into his eyes. She looked straight through him as if he were air, a ghost, something not worth a single second of her time. "I will stay," Elena said, her voice cold and distant. "But I work for Mrs. Margaret, not for you. I do not want to see you. I do not want to speak to you. If you do not accept this condition, I will take her somewhere else and care for her with my own money." Vincent stood there, silent, taking each word like a blade carving into his chest. He did not justify himself, did not explain, did not beg. He only nodded, accepting every condition without a single protest. Elena walked past him, her shoulder nearly brushing his, yet she still did not look, and Vincent watched her until she disappeared around the corner of the hallway. From that night on, every night, Vincent stood outside his mother's door, listening to Elena sing her to sleep in soft Spanish lullabies. And he wondered if he would ever deserve her forgiveness. 2 weeks passed, and the Caruso mansion slowly began to breathe again, rising out of the dark. Margaret grew stronger day by day under Elena's devoted care. She could sit up now. She could eat and drink normally. She could speak full sentences without stammering. A rosy color returned to her wrinkled cheeks, and a smile returned to her thin lips. But while Margaret recovered, an invisible wall still stood tall and unmovable between Elena and Vincent. She avoided him the way you avoid a plague. Each time he stepped into a room, she stepped out. Each time he tried to speak, she turned her back. Each time his eyes searched for her, she looked elsewhere as if he did not exist. Vincent sent word 3 times through the servants, asking to speak with Elena in private, and all 3 times she refused without explanation. The first time, she said she was busy caring for Mrs. Margaret. The second time, she said she was tired. The third time, she did not even bother to answer, only shook her head and closed the door. By the 4th time, Margaret intervened. She took Elena's hand as Elena sat by the bed reading to her, and her aged eyes held a seriousness rarely seen. "You have to go see him," Margaret said, her voice gentle but firm. "Listen to him. For me." Elena meant to refuse, but when she looked into the eyes of the woman who had treated her like a daughter, she could not force the word out. She let out a quiet breath, nodded, and walked toward the study where Vincent was waiting. The room was filled with late afternoon light slipping through heavy red velvet curtains, the bookshelves rising to the ceiling, still as silent witnesses. Vincent stood with his back to the door, staring out the window. But when he heard Elena's footsteps, he turned. His face no longer carried the cold, arrogant hardness of a Mafia boss. It was the face of a man carrying a weight of guilt that could not be washed away. "Thank you for coming," Vincent said, his voice rough as if he had not slept in many nights. Elena did not answer. She stood with her arms folded across her chest, her expression ice cold. She would listen because of Mrs. Margaret, but she would not make it easy for him, not even a little. Then something happened that no one could have imagined. Vincent Caruso, the man who made all of Chicago bow its head, slowly sank to his knees in front of Elena. His knees met the oak floor, his arms hung at his sides, and his steel-gray eyes lifted to her, filled with as much regret as a human being could hold. "I almost killed you," Vincent said, each word heavy as stone. "I almost killed my own mother, because I was too arrogant to see the truth right in front of me. I believed a liar instead of believing an innocent person. I let you be framed, beaten, thrown out into the rain like a dog, and no apology is enough to repay what I have done." Elena stood there, looking down at the man kneeling at her feet, and she did not know what she was feeling. Rage, pain, or something else she was afraid to name. "My father was murdered when I was 18, Vincent went on, his voice breaking into pieces, betrayed by his closest friend, the man he trusted like a brother. I watched him die in his own blood, and from that day on, I swore I would never trust anyone again. I built walls around my heart, thinking that would keep me safe, but those walls did not protect me. They blinded me to Victoria. They kept me from seeing the devil wearing a human face right beside me, and you, the only one who truly protected my mother, were the one I cast out." He stopped, drew in a deep breath as if holding himself together by sheer force. "I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know there is nothing I can do that will erase what happened, but I want you to know that I regret it. From the bottom of my heart, from the deepest place in my dried-out dead soul, I regret it." Elena watched him in silence for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice calm and cold as a frozen lake. "Words are easy, Mr. Caruso. I have heard too many empty apologies in my life. From foster fathers who beat me and apologized the next morning. From foster mothers who accused me and said they did not mean it. Words mean nothing to me, only actions mean something. She turned her back and walked out of the room, leaving Vincent still on his knees on the cold wood floor. He did not call her back, did not try to justify himself further, only watched her retreating figure until the door closed. And for the first time in his life, rejection did not make him angry. It made him feel something far more frightening, a desperate need to become someone worthy of her forgiveness. 4 weeks had passed since the day Vincent knelt in the study, and something had shifted between him and Elena. She no longer avoided him the way you avoid a plague. She no longer looked through him as if he were air. Instead, there were brief conversations when they happened to cross paths in the hallway, polite good mornings, glances that lingered a little longer before she turned away. Vincent did not say much, did not try to force anything, only proved himself through actions, day after day. He spent more time with his mother, learned to listen instead of command, and whenever Elena needed anything for Margaret, he responded immediately without making her ask twice. And Elena, though she did not want to admit it, began to see a different Vincent. Not the cold Mafia boss, but a son trying to mend what he had broken. Late one night, around 2 a.m, Elena woke up thirsty. She quietly rose from the chair beside Margaret's bed, where she often dozed while caring for her, and stepped into the dark hallway. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, laying silver bands across the marble floor, and Elena followed those pale stripes toward the kitchen. But as she passed the slightly open door of the office of Vincent, the voices inside made her stop. "Boss, I found the information you asked for," Luca said, low and grave, "about the case 10 years ago. The Marco De Luca case." Elena knew she should not listen. This was not her business, yet her feet seemed nailed to the floor, and she stood there, hearing every word as if under a spell. "Say it," Vincent's tired voice answered. "I need to know everything. Marco De Luca is dead, just as you ordered," Luca said. "But there is a problem. That night, the men got the address wrong. Before they found the right house, they attacked another home on the same street. The homeowner was an innocent man named Thomas Reyes. He was beaten to death, and the police called it a car accident in exchange for hush money." Silence stretched for a few seconds, as if the air inside the room had turned solid. "Thomas Reyes," Vincent repeated, the name heavy with guilt. "The innocent man I indirectly killed because of my men's carelessness. I have carried this guilt for 10 years, Luca. Every night I see the faces of innocent people who may have died because of my orders. Thomas Reyes haunts me the most, because he did nothing wrong. He only lived in the house at the wrong address." Outside the door, Elena stood frozen like stone. The name Thomas Reyes rang in her mind like a funeral bell, each toll smashing another piece of her heart into fragments. Thomas Reyes, her 5th foster father, the only man in 26 years of her life who had treated her like a true daughter. He had taken her in when she was 16, after she escaped the violent 4th foster family. He had given her a room of her own with yellow curtains and a warm quilt. He had taught her how to cook, taught her how to drive, taught her that not all men in this world were monsters. He had called her Mija and promised he would never let anyone hurt her again. And then one night the police knocked on the door and said he had died in a car accident. 16-year-old Elena cried for 3 days, then was sent back into the foster system, then moved from one family to another until she turned 18 and was pushed out onto the street. She had thought it was an accident. She had thought fate was cruel to steal the only father who had ever loved her. But it was not an accident. It was not fate. It was Vincent Caruso, the man who was slowly healing her heart, the man she was beginning to trust, the man she was beginning to feel something for that she did not dare name, was the one who had killed the only person who had ever truly loved her. Elena did not know how she got back to her room. She only knew that when the door closed behind her and the lock clicked, she collapsed onto the floor, both hands over her mouth to keep her sobs from spilling into the hallway. She cried as if she had never been allowed to cry, the broken sounds tearing her chest open, tears pouring down beyond her control. She cried for Thomas Reyes, for the foster father who had died unjustly in the dark. She cried for the 16-year-old girl who had lost her last thread of hope. And she cried for herself, for a heart breaking all over again because she had dared to believe in the redemption of a killer. Elena lay on the cold floor all night, eyes fixed on the ceiling, tears still quietly sliding down her cheeks. The man who was slowly healing her heart had destroyed the only person who had ever loved her. How could she ever forgive that? The next morning, Elena walked into Vincent's office without knocking. She had not slept a single minute all night, her eyes swollen and red from crying, her face drained pale like someone who had just crawled out of a nightmare. But it was not a nightmare. It was the truth. and that truth was burning her alive from the inside. Vincent looked up from the stack of papers on his desk, and the moment he saw Elena's face, he knew something terrible had happened. He rose, about to say something, but Elena cut him off, her voice trembling from the effort of holding her fury in. "Thomas Reyes," she said, each word fired like a bullet. "Do you know that name?" Vincent went rigid. His face looked as if someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over him, the blood draining from his skin in a single instant. He knew that name. He had carried it like a curse for 10 years. You know about that?" Vincent asked, his voice turned rough. "No." Elena let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp with pain, cracking through the room like shattered glass. "I do not just know, Mr. Caruso. Thomas Reyes was my foster father. He was the only person in this world who ever loved me." And then the wall Elena had built for 26 years collapsed completely. She screamed, losing control in front of someone for the first time in her life, the words pouring out like volcanic lava. Impossible to stop. "You killed him. You killed the only father I ever had. He was the only one who ever gave me a home, who ever called me his daughter, who ever promised to protect me. And you took him from me. I was 16, Mr. Caruso. 16. And I lost my last shred of hope because your men got the address wrong." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she did not care. She did not care that she was standing before the most powerful Mafia boss in Chicago. She did not care that he could have her killed with a single nod. She cared only about the pain ripping her heart apart, about the image of a gentle man with a warm smile stolen away for nothing. Vincent stood there like stone, his steel-gray eyes wide with shock. He had known about Thomas Reyes. He had carried guilt for that man's death for 10 years, but he had never known Thomas Reyes had a foster daughter. He had never known that daughter was Elena, the woman standing before him with a shattered heart. "I did not know," Vincent said, his voice breaking into pieces. "I swear to you, Elena, I did not know he was your foster father. I only knew his name, knew he died unjustly because of my men's mistake. That death has haunted me for 10 years. Every night I see his face in nightmares. That is why I started wanting to change. Not because of you, not because of anyone else, but because I could not live with myself anymore after killing an innocent man." He took a step toward Elena, but she stepped back, her hands lifting as if to defend herself from an enemy. "I cannot bring him back," Vincent went on, desperation bleeding into his voice. "I cannot erase what happened. But for 10 years, I have sent money to his wife every month, anonymously, to make sure she never had to worry about finances. I tried to atone in the only way I knew. But I know it is not enough. Nothing is enough. Nothing can ever be enough to repay an innocent life." Elena did not answer. She only turned and ran out of the room, ran to her own room and began to pack. She could not stay here another minute. She could not look at the man who had taken the only father she ever had, no matter how much he regretted it. Some guilt cannot be forgiven. Some wounds cannot be healed. She went to Margaret's room to say goodbye, tears still clinging to her cheeks. The old woman looked at her with eyes full of understanding, and before Elena could say a single word, Margaret spoke. "You know about Thomas Reyes now, do you not?" she asked softly. Elena froze. "You knew," Margaret answered, her voice heavy with sorrow. "I know everything, my daughter. I know Thomas was your foster father. I know my son indirectly caused his death. And I know something you may not know." She reached into the bedside drawer and took out an old envelope, handing it to Elena. "This is the last letter Thomas wrote to his wife before he died. She sent it to me after she learned I was the mother of the man who caused her husband's death. She wanted me to read it, and now I want you to read it." Elena took the letter with shaking hands, opened it, and read the familiar handwriting she still remembered. And when she reached the final lines, her heart seemed to stop. "If the man who did this ever feels guilt, tell him I forgive him. Hate only breeds more hate. I do not want my wife, I do not want my foster daughter, to live in hatred. I want them to be free." Elena stopped at the doorway, her hand trembling on the doorknob. Thomas's words rang through her mind like a bell. He had forgiven. The man who died unjustly had forgiven the one who killed him. Could she do the same? Could she forgive what felt unforgivable? Elena stood in the doorway for what felt like an endless stretch of time, Thomas Reyes's letter still clenched in her hand like the last treasure from a life already lost. His words echoed through her mind, striking the walls of hatred she had built through the night, and one by one those bricks began to crack. Hate only breeds more hate. That was what he had written. The man murdered for nothing, the only foster father who had ever truly loved her, had chosen forgiveness instead of vengeance. If he could do that, did she have the right to carry the hatred he had refused? Elena turned back and walked slowly toward Vincent's office. He was still there, exactly where she had left him, as if he did not dare move, did not dare breathe, only waiting for the final sentence from her. When he saw Elena return, a thin spark of hope flickered in Vincent's steel-gray eyes, but he smothered it at once, afraid to believe what he was seeing. "I do not forgive you," Elena said, her voice calmer now, but still threaded with pain. "Not yet. Maybe I never will, not completely. But Thomas, my foster father, he forgave you. And I want to believe he was right. I want to believe people can change, that the mistakes of the past do not have to define the future." She stepped closer, her brown eyes locking onto Vincent's gray ones with absolute seriousness. "I will stay, but on one condition." Vincent nodded immediately, without even asking what that condition was. "Anything. Make me believe Thomas's death meant something," Elena said, each word clear and unshakable. "Become the man he would be proud of. Not a mafia boss who kills without blinking, not the blind judge you were the day you threw me out, but a decent man, a good son, a human being worthy of the forgiveness Thomas gave you." Vincent looked at her, and in the eyes of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, Elena saw something she had never seen before, a complete sincerity, unhidden, uncalculated. "I will do it," he said, his voice like a sacred vow. "Even if it takes my whole life, I will become the man Thomas Reyes would be proud of. I will become someone worthy of his forgiveness, and worthy of you." From that day on, everything between them began to change. There was no longer a line between master and servant, no longer a distance between sinner and victim. They began again from the beginning, like two strangers meeting for the first time and choosing to understand instead of judge. Vincent started spending time with Elena and Margaret at dinner every night, listening to Elena's stories of childhood passed through foster homes, sharing the years he had grown up beneath his father's shadow and the weight of a mafia empire. They talked about books, about music, about dreams that had been buried and hopes that still flickered stubbornly alive. And Margaret sat there, watching her two children, one by blood and one by heart, slowly find their way back to each other through the wreckage of the past. But while light was returning to the Caruso mansion, darkness was still lurking in corners no one could see. That night, after the whole house had fallen asleep, Mrs. Helen Porter, the 58-year-old housekeeper who had served the Caruso family for 15 years, slipped out into the back garden with a phone in her hand. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then dialed and lifted the phone to her ear. "Miss Victoria," she whispered, her voice carrying the fawning tone of a lackey. "I have news. The Mexican girl is back, and she and Mr. Vincent are getting closer. They eat dinner together every day. He looks at her like she is his whole world." On the other end of the line, Victoria's voice came through cold as ice. "Keep watching. Report everything to me. I want to know where they go, what they do, what they say to each other. Everything." "Yes, miss," Helen Porter answered, her eyes gleaming with greed as she pictured the money Victoria had promised. "I will not miss a thing." The call ended, and Helen Porter slipped back into the house like a shadow. She had been Victoria's spy for months, bought with the promise of a large sum, enough for her to retire in comfort, and she had no intention of stopping, even if it meant betraying the family that had fed her for 15 years. In the darkness of the Caruso mansion, a traitor was watching and waiting, and in a shabby apartment on the other side of the city, Victoria Ashford was planning something more brutal than anyone could imagine. 2 months passed like a beautiful dream Elena did not dare believe was real. The Caruso mansion was no longer the cold fortress of a mafia boss, but a true home, where laughter rang out every day and love filled every corner of every room. Margaret had recovered completely. She could walk normally, speak clearly and smoothly, and every morning she went down to the garden to admire the flowers with Elena. Color returned to her cheeks, her eyes brightened with the joy of living, and her laughter was the sweetest melody this mansion had heard in many gloomy years. And Vincent, once the cold mafia boss, had become an entirely different man. He laughed more, spoke more gently, and whenever he looked at Elena, those steel-gray eyes were no longer icy. They were warm as firelight in winter. One full moon night, as they stood on the balcony looking out over a garden washed in silver, Vincent took Elena's hand and spoke words he had never spoken to anyone. "I love you, Elena. I do not know exactly when it began, but I know I cannot imagine my life without you anymore." Elena looked at him, her brown eyes shimmering in the moonlight, and she realized her heart had belonged to this man for a long time, even as she fought it, even as she built walls to keep it out. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Even though I tried not to. Even though I know it is crazy. Vincent leaned down, and his lips met hers in their first kiss, gentle and sweet as a promise of a future neither of them had dared to dream. After that kiss, they stood in each other's arms beneath the moonlight, and Vincent told Elena about his plans. I want to give it all up, he said. The Mafia, the power, the dirty deals. I will hand everything over to Luca, legalize the income streams, and live like a normal man, a normal husband, a normal son. I am sick of living in the shadows, Elena. I want to step into the light. With you. Margaret's 73rd birthday arrived in the warm air of spring. Elena rose early to make the birthday cake by hand. A chocolate cake with fresh cream and delicate sugar flowers she had been learning to make all week. Vincent decorated the dining room himself with fresh blooms from the garden. And when Margaret walked in, she cried with happiness at the sight of the two people she loved most, standing there with radiant smiles. The small celebration held only the three of them, but it was the happiest celebration the mansion had ever witnessed. Vincent laughed. A real laugh from the bottom of his heart. For the first time in many years since his father died, Elena sang happy birthday in Spanish, and Margaret blew out the candles with eyes shining with happy tears. After the cake, Margaret took the hands of her two children, one by blood and one by heart, and spoke through a tight, trembling voice. This is all I ever wanted. My son is happy, and a daughter I never had. I can die with no regrets. You will live to be 100, Vincent said, kissing his mother's forehead, and you will see your grandchildren running through this garden. Elena blushed, and Margaret laughed, a clear, bright laugh like a woman in her 20s. Everything seemed perfect. Victoria Ashford appeared to have vanished from their lives entirely, like a nightmare that had passed and would never return. No one spoke of her anymore. No one worried about her anymore. The story seemed as if it had reached a happy ending. But in the darkness of the kitchen, after everyone had gone to sleep and the mansion had fallen silent, Helen Porter pulled out her phone and typed a message. Tonight, 2 a.m, the guard at the East Wing will be distracted. I will leave the back door open. The message was sent, and Helen Porter smiled in the dark, the smile of a traitor waiting for her reward. 1:47 a.m, while the Caruso mansion slept in peaceful, careless slumber, 2 black shadows slipped over the wall surrounding the property. They carried knives, sedatives, and orders to kill. Victoria's revenge had finally begun. Elena jolted awake in the middle of the night, her heart hammering out of control for a reason she could not name. She lay perfectly still, listening in the dark, the room drowned in a suffocating silence. Yet the survival instinct sharpened by 26 years of living in fear was screaming that something was wrong. A small sound came from somewhere in the hallway, like footsteps trying to move too softly, like a breath held back by someone determined to make no noise. Elena slid out of bed, bare feet touching the cold wooden floor, and quietly opened her door to look outside. What she saw made the blood in her veins turn to ice. The 2 guards assigned to this floor lay motionless on the ground, a pool of dark blood spreading beneath their heads under the moonlight spilling through the window. And at the far end of the hallway, 2 black figures were moving toward Margaret's bedroom, knives in their hands catching the moon and flashing a hard, silver cold. Elena did not think. The instinct to protect the woman she loved like a real mother ignited stronger than any fear. She drew in a deep breath and screamed with everything in her chest. There are intruders. Alarm, alarm. Her voice ripped through the night silence, echoing through the mansion like a death bell. The 2 shadows snapped around, and in the moonlight pouring through the windows, Elena saw their faces, 2 unfamiliar men with the cold eyes of professional killers. But Elena did not run. She ran toward the danger, toward Margaret's room, toward the 2 murderers standing between her and the woman she had to protect. She reached Margaret's door in seconds, threw her arms wide to shield the white door with her body, her brown eyes burning with resolve as she stared down the 2 assassins advancing. If you want to get in, you will have to kill me first, Elena said, her voice steady even while her heart pounded like a war drum. The first assassin stopped, a cruel smile spreading across the scarred face. That is exactly the plan, sweetheart. Victoria sends her regards. That name, Victoria, made Elena understand everything in an instant. This was not a random robbery. This was revenge. The hand of the she-devil they thought had vanished, reaching out from the dark to destroy everything they had built. But Elena did not have time to be afraid. The first assassin lunged, the blade swinging through the darkness. Elena twisted aside and grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the table beside the door, the only weapon within reach. She swung it with all the strength of someone fighting for her life, and the heavy brass head slammed into the assassin's shoulder with a sickening crack. He staggered back, his face contorting with pain, but Elena knew she had only bought a few seconds. She turned to shield the door again, the lamp raised high, ready for the next strike. But she had forgotten the second assassin. He had silently circled behind her while she focused on his partner, and when she felt his presence, it was already too late. Elena turned, but the blade was already coming down in a deadly silver arc. Cold steel tore into her shoulder, and blood burst out like a spring, splashing the white door of Margaret's room in red. Pain flared through her body like fire, as if someone had struck a match to her flesh and let it burn without end. Elena staggered, her knees threatening to fold, her vision blurring from the shock. But she did not fall. She could not fall. Not when Margaret was right behind that door. Not when the old woman's frightened cries were rising from inside. Not when Elena was the only thing standing between the mother she loved and two blood-hungry killers. Elena clenched the lamp with her uninjured hand, blood running down her arm from her shoulder and dripping onto the marble floor. She forced herself upright again, her back pressed to the door, her eyes still burning with defiance even as her face went pale from blood loss. "You will have to step over my dead body," she said through clenched teeth, "and I will not die easily." The first assassin recovered from the blow to his shoulder, his face twisted with anger and pain. He lunged at the same time as his partner, two gleaming blades swinging toward Elena together like the claws of death. Elena slipped the first strike, swung the brass lamp back with her uninjured arm, but the pain from the wound in her shoulder slowed her by a single beat. The second man's knife sliced across her arm, blood pouring out and staining the white sleeve of her nightgown. Yet Elena did not cry out even once. She clenched her teeth and endured it, stepping back a pace but still refusing to leave Margaret's door. Blood from her shoulder and her arm ran down onto the marble floor, making smeared red trails beneath the moonlight spilling through the window. Her head began to spin from blood loss, her vision blurring and sharpening again, but she stayed on her feet, still holding the brass lamp like the last weapon between Margaret and death. A gunshot thundered, tearing the night apart. The first assassin dropped hard to the floor, a black bullet hole in the center of his forehead, his eyes still wide open because he never had time to understand what had happened. Vincent Caruso appeared at the end of the hall like a storm, the gun in his hand still smoking, his steel-gray eyes burning with the fire of hell. Behind him, Luca and 5 other guards were rushing forward with weapons ready. The second assassin turned to face the new threat, but Luca was faster. The 34-year-old head of security surged in like a panther, drove a fist into the assassin's face, then wrenched the man's arm behind his back and slammed his face down onto the marble with a heavy crash. But in the chaos, no one noticed another figure moving silently in from the staircase. Helen Porter, the 58-year-old housekeeper with the gentle face who had served the Caruso family for 15 years, had a kitchen knife in her hand. Her eyes no longer held the servile, fawning look of a maid. They burned with the crazed flame of someone who had sold her soul to the devil. While Luca was pinning the assassin, Helen lunged from behind and drove the knife deep into Luca's back. "Victoria promised me $1 million, she screamed, her voice shrill with madness. $1 million so I can get out of this hell." Luca collapsed to the floor, blood pouring from the wound in his back, his face drained white from shock and pain. A second gunshot cracked. Helen Porter fell beside her victim, the bullet from Vincent's gun tearing through her chest. But it was too late. Luca lay on the marble, blood spreading beneath him like a dark red flower blooming in the night. Vincent froze for a single second, his eyes flicking from Elena slumped against Margaret's door, to Luca gasping on the floor. And for the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago did not know what to do. Then he rushed to Elena, dropped to his knees, and gathered her into his arms, not caring that her blood was soaking his white shirt red. Elena, look at me," Vincent said, his voice shaking with panic. "Open your eyes, please, open your eyes." Elena opened them, her brown eyes dim from blood loss but still holding a small, stubborn spark of life. And the first thing she asked, even as her body burned with pain, even as blood still flowed from 2 wounds, was not about herself. "Is Mrs. Margaret safe?" Vincent looked at her, looked at the woman who had used her own body as a shield for his mother, looked at eyes that still worried for someone else even while death drew near, and tears spilled down his face. For the first time in 18 years since the day his father was killed, Vincent Caruso cried. "She is safe," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved her." Again, behind them, Luca's eyes were slowly closing. The man who had been Vincent's brother in everything but blood, the man who had been loyal to him for 12 years without a single complaint, was dying on the cold marble floor. Dr. Nathan Cole arrived at the Caruso mansion only 15 minutes after the emergency call, but those 15 minutes stretched like an entire century for Vincent. 2 first-floor bedrooms were turned into a makeshift emergency ward. the smell of disinfectant and fresh blood tangled together into the scent of death lurking close. Elena lay on one bed, her face pale as blank paper, the 2 wounds on her shoulder and arm wrapped in temporary bandages, yet blood still seeping through the cloth. Dr. Cole examined her and let out a breath of relief. "The wounds are deep, but they did not hit an artery or any critical tendon," he told Vincent. "She needs stitches and at least 2 weeks of rest. She lost a good amount of blood, but not enough to threaten her life. She will be fine." But when the doctor stepped into the next room where Luca lay, his face darkened like storm clouds before a downpour. The stab wound in Luca's back was deep and dangerous. The steel blade had come within less than an inch of his spine, and the amount of blood he had lost had passed what was safe. "I will be honest with you, Vincent," Dr. Cole said, his voice heavy. "The knife went in close to the spine and damaged some internal organs. I did everything I could, but Luca has a 50% chance of making it through tonight. We need to pray." Vincent sat between the 2 rooms, on a chair in the hallway that connected the doors, his head bowed, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. On his left, Elena slept under pain medicine, her face peaceful as an angel, even while her body was covered in wounds. On his right, Luca lay motionless, the heart monitor beeping in a steady rhythm like a countdown to fate. For the first time in his life, Vincent Caruso felt completely powerless. He was the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. He could order a death with a single nod. He could buy an entire city if he wanted, but he could do nothing to save the brother dying on that bed, nothing to erase the scars that would mark the body of the woman he loved. Money and power meant nothing in the face of death. Footsteps sounded at the end of the hall, and a guard appeared with a tense face. "Boss," the surviving assassin talked. Vincent lifted his head, his steel-gray eyes cold as ice. "Speak." "Victoria Ashford is in an apartment near the South Harbor, and she is not acting alone. Enzo Marchetti is backing her, providing men and weapons. They have been planning this for 2 months." Enzo Marchetti. The name hit Vincent like a knife to the chest. Enzo was an old enemy of the Caruso family, a man who had been trying to bring Vincent down for years, but had never found an opening. Now he had found the perfect ally in Victoria, a woman with enough hatred and madness to do anything. Vincent stood, his face hardening into the cold mask of the mafia boss he used to be. He walked toward the door, and in that silhouette, Elena saw the ghost of a killer rising from ash. "Vincent." Elena's weak voice came from behind him. She had woken, her brown eyes dimmed by pain medicine, but still clear enough to understand what was about to happen. "Do not become a monster again. Do not do this tonight. Do not do it for me." Vincent stopped and turned. He looked at Elena lying there with white bandages, stained red wrapped around her shoulder and arm. He looked toward Luca in the next room, his brother who had been loyal for 12 years, and in his chest, 2 demons fought, rage demanding blood be paid with blood, and Elena's voice calling him back toward the light. Vincent stepped to Elena's bedside, bent down, and kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her cold skin. "I will come back," he whispered. Then he straightened and walked out, not looking back. Elena watched his back vanish beyond the door, and she saw something in those steel-gray eyes that frightened her down to the bone. The Mafia King was going hunting, and she was not sure he would return as the man she loved. The shabby apartment sat inside an abandoned building near the South Harbor of Chicago, a place where streetlights did not reach and train horns wailed like calls from lost souls. Vincent kicked the rotting door off its hinges, the gun in his hand leveled straight ahead, his security detail tight behind him like ghosts in the night. The room inside reeked of damp and cheap liquor, candlelight flickering and throwing dancing black shadows across the walls. And in the corner, Victoria Ashford sat curled in on herself like a beast trapped with nowhere left to run. The golden hair that had once been perfectly styled was now tangled and filthy. The green eyes that had once glittered with calculation now burned with a crazed fire. The expensive dress she had once worn like armor was now nothing but a wrinkled, ruined scrap. When she saw Vincent, Victoria sprang up like a coiled spring, her face twisted by hatred and madness. "You!" she screamed, her voice shrill as breaking glass. "You destroyed me. I was supposed to be a queen. I was supposed to have everything. But you took it all away for that miserable Mexican maid." Another figure appeared from the adjoining room, and Vincent recognized the face at once. Enzo Marchetti, the rival mobster who had been trying to overthrow the Caruso family for years, stood there with a gun in his hand and a vicious smile on his mouth. "Vincent Caruso," Enzo said, his voice low and poisonous. "So you finally came. I have been waiting for this day a long time." Gunfire erupted in the tight space, bullets ripping through the thick air. Vincent's guards surged in, trading shots with Enzo's men in a fight that was brief but brutal. Enzo took a round through the shoulder, his face contorting with pain, and he bolted toward the back door like a rat fleeing a trap. Vincent started to go after him, but Enzo vanished into the night, leaving Victoria alone to face the fury of the man she had betrayed. The room fell silent again after the shooting. Vincent's guards had subdued Enzo's men, and now there was only Vincent and Victoria, facing each other in the trembling candlelight. Vincent stepped forward, the gun aimed straight at Victoria's head, his finger set on the trigger, ready to squeeze. She backed up until her spine hit the wall, nowhere left to run. "Do it," Victoria whispered, her green eyes blazing with reckless defiance. "Kill me. I know you want to. I know you have dreamed about this moment since the day you threw me out." Vincent stared into her eyes and saw pure madness staring back at him. The rage in his chest roared like a starving animal, demanding blood be paid with blood, demanding death as repayment for what she had done to Elena, to Luca, to his mother. His finger tightened on the trigger. Just a little more, just one more second, and it would all be over. But in that fateful instant, Elena's voice rang in his mind like a bell. "Do not become a monster again. Do not do it for me." He saw her face in the dark, her brown eyes looking at him with all the trust she had given him. He remembered Thomas Reyes, the innocent man who had died because of his men's mistake 10 years earlier, the death that haunted him every night and drove him toward change. He remembered his promise to Elena. Make me believe Thomas's death meant something. Become the man he would be proud of. If Vincent squeezed the trigger now, he would be nothing but the killer he had always been. Nothing would change. There would be no redemption. Thomas Reyes's death would remain meaningless forever, and Vincent would remain a monster in Elena's eyes, in his mother's eyes, in his own. Vincent lowered the gun. Victoria stared at him, eyes wide with shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. "You will live," Vincent said, his voice cold as ice yet strangely calm. "But in prison, for the rest of your life. That is a punishment worse than death for someone like you. You will grow old behind bars. You will watch the world outside and never be able to touch it. You will die alone and forgotten. No one will remember Victoria Ashford. No one will cry when you die. That is the fate you deserve." He turned to his guards. "Call the police. Hand her over to them along with all the evidence of hiring assassins to kill." Victoria screamed when the police arrived and cuffed her, her shrill voice echoing through the shabby apartment. "You will regret this. I swear you will regret this." "This is not over, Vincent Caruso." But Vincent did not hear her. He was already running out, throwing himself into his car and driving like a madman back to the mansion, back to Elena, back to the new life he had finally chosen. Vincent returned to the mansion as dawn was just breaking over the Chicago horizon, the first light of a new day cutting through the clouds like a promise of a new beginning. And the first good news that greeted him was sweeter than that sunrise. Luca had pulled through the critical point. Dr. Cole called it a medical miracle, one of those rare cases where a patient's will to live defeated every bleak prediction. The blade had not reached the spine as first feared, and though Luca would need 6 months to fully recover, he would live, and he would walk normally again. When Vincent entered Elena's room, she was sitting propped up against the pillows, her face still pale but her brown eyes brightening when she saw him. "You did not kill her," Elena said. Not a question but a statement, as if she had known in advance he would choose the right path. "I did not kill her," Vincent repeated, sitting down beside the bed and taking her small hand in his. "You were right. Killing her would bring nothing but another meaningless death. I want to become the man Thomas Reyes would be proud of, the man you can love without shame." That same day, Vincent summoned the people closest to him in the organization and announced the decision that would change his life forever. He would leave the Mafia completely, transfer power to those he trusted, and spend the rest of his life making every source of the family's income legitimate. No more weapons, no more drugs, no more dark deals in the night. Vincent Caruso would die, and from the ashes of the Mafia boss, a new man would be born. 1 year later, the Caruso mansion was no longer a fortress of the underworld. A polished brass plaque on the gate bore the words Margaret Hart Foundation, engraved with dignity, and every day dozens of people came here searching for help and hope. Elena Reyes, the orphan girl once thrown out into the rain like a criminal, was now the foundation's chief executive, the woman changing the lives of hundreds of victims of domestic violence and overlooked caregivers. She stood in the office that had once been Vincent's study, looking out at the garden, where the children of families supported by the foundation were playing, and she knew that every suffering she had endured had finally meant something. Margaret Caruso, 73, healthy and full of life, became the Foundation's most active volunteer. She told her story to those who came seeking help, how she had nearly been killed by her own son's fiancé, how a young woman had used her body as a shield to protect her, how redemption and forgiveness had transformed her entire family. Each time she told it, tears ran down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness and gratitude. Luca Benedetti, after 6 difficult months of recovery, was fully healthy again. He refused to leave the Caruso family even when Vincent offered him a large sum to retire, and instead accepted the position of head of security for the Foundation. "I followed the boss down to hell," Luca said with a rare smile. "I have no reason not to follow him up to heaven." One spring afternoon, when magnolia blossoms filled the garden and their sweet fragrance saturated the air, Vincent led Elena outside on the pretense of showing her a new flower variety. But when they reached the center of the garden, beneath an arch of pure white blooms forming a romantic canopy, Vincent suddenly dropped to one knee on the green grass, a red velvet box in his hand. Elena stood frozen, eyes wide with shock, her hand covering her mouth as she saw the diamond ring glittering inside. "Elena Reyes," Vincent said, his voice trembling with emotion for the first time in his life. "You saved my mother. You saved Luca. And most of all, you saved me from the darkness I thought I would drown in forever. Will you marry me? Not as the wife of a mafia boss, only as the wife of a man who wants to spend the rest of his life becoming worthy of your love." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but they were the happiest tears she had ever cried in 26 years of suffering. "Yes," she whispered, then said it louder as Vincent slid the ring onto her finger. Yes, the wedding was set for spring. The guest list was short, only the people they loved most. Everything seemed perfect. But in a maximum security prison hundreds of miles from Chicago, Victoria Ashford was smiling in her dark cell, because she still had one last card she had not played. The wedding day arrived beneath the rich golden sunlight of spring, the garden of the Caruso estate overflowing with the fragrance of magnolia in full bloom, their pure white petals like small stars fallen from heaven to bless the couple. White chairs were lined up neatly on the lush green lawn. Silk ribbons fluttered softly in the breeze, and a gentle classical melody drifted from a small band set beneath the branches of an ancient oak. The guest list was not large, only about 30 of the closest people, because this was not a wedding meant to display power or wealth. This was a wedding of love, of redemption, of 2 broken hearts that had found each other in the storms of life. Vincent stood at the end of the aisle, laid with a white runner, dressed in a spotless white suit that made his steel-gray eyes shine with happiness instead of the old icy cold. Father Michael stood beside him with a Bible in his hand and a kind smile on his lips. And when the wedding music began, every gaze turned to the head of the aisle. Elena appeared in a simple yet elegant white wedding dress, her dark hair swept up to reveal the graceful line of her neck, her brown eyes bright with tears of joy. And beside her, holding her hand and guiding her along the white path, was not a father she had never known, but Margaret Caruso, the woman who had become her mother through love alone. Margaret wore a refined pale blue dress, her face glowing with pride and joy, tears already sliding down her cheeks from the moment the music rose. She led Elena slowly down the aisle, and when they reached Vincent, she placed Elena's hand into her son's, with all the solemnity of a sacred rite. "Love her the way you love me," Margaret whispered to Vincent, "because she is my daughter." Vincent nodded, his eyes reddened with emotion, and he held Elena's hand as if he would never let go. Father Michael began the ceremony, and when it came time for the vows, Vincent turned to Elena with all the love a human heart could hold. "Elena," he said, his voice trembling, "you taught me that real strength is not power, it is compassion. You taught me that the past does not define us, our choices do. You saved my mother, you saved me, and you gave me a reason to become better every day. I swear I will love you, protect you, and be worthy of you until my final breath." Elena smiled through her tears and answered him. "Vincent, I once thought I would never trust anyone, never love anyone, that I would live forever in the shadow of my painful past. But you taught me that even the most broken people can change. That forgiveness is not weakness, it is the bravest thing we can do. I swear I will love you, trust you, and build a better future with you." Father Michael declared them husband and wife, and Vincent bent down and kissed Elena to the sound of applause and happy tears. Their first kiss as husband and wife was sweet and full of promise, like a vow without words for a lifetime together. But just as their lips parted, a scream tore through the joyful air. "If I cannot have him, no one can." Everyone turned, and what they saw made blood freeze in their veins. Victoria Ashford was rushing toward the ceremony, her blonde hair wild, her eyes blazing with madness and hate, and in her hand was a gleaming kitchen knife. She had escaped prison, found a way to come here, waited for the perfect moment to destroy everything. Victoria charged straight at Elena with the speed of a madwoman, the knife raised high to plunge down. But before she could get close, a figure cut in front of her. Luca Benedetti, the man who had nearly died protecting this family, surged forward like a panther and slammed Victoria to the ground in an instant. He wrenched her arm behind her back, pressed her face into the grass, and cuffed her with the handcuffs he always carried. "Not today," Luca said coldly. "Never." Police arrived within 10 minutes, and Victoria was led away one last time, still screaming curses in a shrill, unhinged voice, until she was shoved into the car and vanished from their lives forever. The ceremony continued after that moment of chaos, because no force could destroy the happiness they had built from suffering and tears. As sunset painted the Chicago sky red, Vincent and Elena stood by the living room window, fingers intertwined, looking out at the garden where they had just become husband and wife. The last light of day warmed their faces, shaping them into lines of peace and tenderness neither of them had believed they would ever hold. "Children, come eat dinner," Margaret's voice called from behind them, warm and full of love. "I made your favorite for both of you." Vincent and Elena looked at each other, smiled, then turned back into the house. Because this was their life now. No more darkness, no more secrets, no more fear. Only love, forgiveness, and a family rebuilt from shattered pieces. Some storms come to destroy, but some storms come to wash away what no longer belongs to us, leaving only what truly matters. The Caruso mansion survived its storm, and what remained was love, forgiveness, and a family reborn from ashes. This story brings us many valuable lessons about life. It is a lesson about courage, about standing up to protect the vulnerable, even when the cost is yourself, the way Elena did. It is a lesson about redemption and change, when Vincent recognized his mistakes and had the courage to repair what he had broken. It is a lesson about resilience, when Margaret never gave up hope even in the darkest circumstances. And most of all, it is a lesson in how love and forgiveness can heal every wound, can change even the coldest hearts. In real life, all of us face storms. It may be betrayal, injustice, or pain we think we cannot survive. But remember that, like Elena, we always have a choice. The choice to rise or fall, the choice to forgive or to cling to hatred, the choice to become a better version of ourselves or to let the past define the future. How do you feel about this story? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up to protect someone even knowing you would pay a price? Or have you ever forgiven someone even after they hurt you deeply? Please share your story in the comments below. We truly want to hear what is in your heart. If this story touched you, please press like and share this video with those you believe also need to hear it. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss moving stories about love, justice, and redemption every day. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a life filled with joy and peace each day. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky will clear, and kind people like you deserve the very best. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.